Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Frank here. I've got a woodworking project this time. I need to make a stand for a printer in the house. I need to stack two printers, and so I need to make a four-sided open-ended box basically that one printer will sit on the inside and the other printer will sit on top, and when we get it done we'll take it inside and set it up and show you what I'm talking about. So the first step is getting out the lumber, getting out the wood, as I call it. And I've got quite a supply of hardwood lumber here. Got cherry here. This section's all cherry. Most of what's up here is walnut. Under the tarps here is a stack of thicker cherry and walnut. It's anywhere from 2 to 4 inches thick. So we won't break into that pile since we don't need anything that thick, though you could resaw it to, cut it into thinner boards. But we do have enough lumber here, and my objective is not, since it's kind of a utility thing, I do want it to look nice, but it's not going to be built to the standards of a tall case clock or a chest of drawers or desk or anything like that, since it's just a quick project to solve a need in the house. I'll put some pictures up here of some of my previous furniture projects, but first thing we're going to do is get the wood out. I'm going to go through this pile and pick some boards which are suitable. You want them to be of a width which will allow you to glue up a panel. My panels are roughly 20 inches wide, so I'm looking for like 3 7-inch wide boards, or 4 6-inch boards, or 2 5-inch boards and a couple 6-inch boards, something that when you cut them to length you can glue them up and you get roughly a 20-inch wide panel that you then trim to final width. You don't want to buy boards, you want to minimize the amount of waste, in other words. So if you go to a hardware supplier and you go to buy cherry or walnut lumber, you're going to pay, I don't even know what the going price is now, but it's got to be $10, $12, maybe even $15 a board foot. The board foot is a square foot 1 inch thick. So if you build a box that has 4 sides, roughly 2 feet by 2 feet, you're talking 16 board feet. It's $150 to $250 worth of lumber for just a small project. So you certainly don't want to buy more lumber than you need. And most places, millwork suppliers are going to sell the lumber S4S, or surfaced 4 sides. That'll be smooth, plain smooth on all 4 sides, 2-dimension, either usually 13/16. Hardwood lumber would be 13/16 of an inch thick. Sometimes you'll see it 3/4, but either way, it'll be surfaced on 4 sides and smooth. So you won't have to do some of the steps we'll do here. First is to get the lumber and plane it to 3/4 of an inch thick. Most of this lumber here is rough cut. You can see it's got the saw marks on it still, and it's about an inch thick. So we'll plane it down to 3/4 of an inch. All right, so I'm going to put the camera on a tripod and we'll go through this stack and pick out some boards. Some of the boards on the top here, these are well over an inch thick. These are 1.5 inches. They're called 6/4. So I won't be using them, so I'm going to move them out of the way and get down to the 4/4 or 1 inch thick boards here. But I've picked a few boards of cherry out of the pile that will be suitable, and we'll take these over and start breaking them down to the dimensions we need for the stand. There are 2 tools we're going to use in this project that you never see on YouTube, and one is the shaper, wood shaper. Basically a router table of sorts, only this precedes the router table by many decades. These are, this is a 3 horsepower Delta Rockwell shaper. Probably, I don't know, it's, I've had it for 20 years. So this is used a lot in professional cabinet shops. If you're making windows or doors, this is pretty much indispensable, but you don't see it in many home shops, except maybe the most adventurous home shops. So we're going to use the shaper, and the second thing we're going to use that I've never seen is the Leigh dovetail jig. So this lets you dovetail boards. Let's see, I think it's 24 inches wide, right? 24 inches wide, and you can set your dovetail spacing any way you want. Random, asymmetrical, perfectly symmetrical, whatever you want to do. And you can set the pins and tails any width you want. So it's a great tool. I use it to dovetail carcasses of chests of drawers and desks and that sort of thing. So anyway, so we'll use this. I'll show you how to set up and use this. It takes a little bit of time to get set up, but it does a beautiful job of very wide dovetails, and they look handmade because you can set the width of the tails whatever you want, and you can make them asymmetrical. So it's a very cool jig. So those are the two things we're going to do. We're going to use this to assemble the carcass of the printer stand with dovetails, and then we're going to use the shaper to put a decorative edge on the top. So I'm looking for basically 25-inch increments of clear lumber. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this right here. And so I'm cutting it so I can plane it, and it's easier to handle. It won't be 12 feet long. There'll be, 5 or 6 foot lengths, which I'll be able to handle through the planer more easily. And then I'll get, on one end of this cut, I'll get 2 pieces. The other end of the cut, I'll get 3 pieces. So that's the plan. All right, so I've got 8 pieces that, about half of them are about 7 or 8 feet long, half of them are 5 or 6 feet long. We're going to run them through the planer. I'm not going to bring them all the way down to 3/4 of an inch. My plan is to glue up the panels and run the panels back through the planer to bring them down to final dimension. If you don't have a planer wide enough to do that, and my planer is 20 inches wide, allows me to plane panels up to 20 inches wide, which is my target dimension, just happens to be my target dimension for these panels. Actually, they could be 18 inches. They could be anywhere from 18 to 20 inches. If you don't have a planer that will plane 20 inches, then you do want to surface them to final dimension or very close, because after glue up, when you glue these boards edge to edge and make a panel out of them, finishing them is going to take a lot of extra work if you don't have them all ready to final dimension. So in the case of a wide planer, you can dimension them to final dimension there and then just lightly sand them. And so I'm probably going to bring them down to 7/8 or so, maybe probably about 7/8 of an inch, or maybe a little bit under, just enough to get both sides smooth and flat. So then we'll bring them to final dimension when after we glue them up. So using my mini Ligno moisture meter, which I've had for 30 years, the moisture of this cherry lumber looks like it's about 6%. So this meter has a couple of pins on the end which you push into the wood and measures the resistance, and based on the species you have this set on either 2 or 3, and for cherry it's on 3. So pick a spot. I don't want to mar some part of the wood that I might use, but so it looks like here it's 6%. So that's as good as any kiln dried lumber. Pick another board, take take this one. Again, it's reading 6%. Now granted, well, this was in the middle of the board because I cut this. So even though this lumber has never been kiln dried, the fact that it's been stored indoors here in a heated and air conditioned shop for 7 years here and then dried for 15 years before that, it's 6%, which is as good as any kiln dried lumber. All right, so at 6% moisture, we're good to go. If you had typical air dried lumber after a few years, maybe 8 or 10%, depending on where it was dried, you're taking a little bit of risk building furniture out of 8 or 10, or certainly anything more than that moisture. You certainly in that case need to take into account that it's going to shrink a little bit more. Now you move this into the house, and with seasonal changes, all wood moves, expands and contracts. So we won't have to worry about in this project because all of our grain will be run in the same direction. We won't have any cross grain construction, so it won't be a big deal. But that's just to show you what 20 years of air drying does to your lumber. So we have a stack of cherry here. We'll start breaking it down into pieces that are closer to what we finally need. We'll joint one edge, we'll rip the other edge parallel, and we'll begin assembling the sections of this that will make up our panels. So got a little more processing to do in order to get to the point where we can glue up our panels. So this board had a little bit of a crook to it. So you saw me take a little bit of material off the two ends and then run it full length. There was had kind of a concave curve to it. So doing that, taking a little bit off the two ends and then running it through gets you a straighter edge with less waste. So you want to run the boards through the joiner flush against the fence with initial pressure on the in-feed table, but as soon as you've got material on the out-feed table, you shift your pressure to the out-feed table and keep all your pressure on the out-feed table. So that ensures that you get a straight edge. So I've just finished jointing all the boards. I cut a couple of them to shorter length. But once we've got one edge jointed, so it's perfectly straight and square to the faces, then next step is to put on the table saw and rip the other edge, which is rough still, true, parallel to this square edge. And that'll then give us two parallel square edges, one ripped on the table saw and the other one jointed on the joiner. Then we can go, then the next step then is to continue to cut them into approximately 25-inch pieces, and so we have enough to glue up the panels we're looking for. got all the lumber broken down into usable lengths, and all of the boards have been surfaced, jointed, and then ripped parallel. So they're all square boards that we can use to build our panels from. So obviously they're random widths, they're all different widths. So we'll work on picking combinations of boards. This one has some quilting. This is like, look at the figure there. Some quilted cherry. I'm not sure where we can use that, and I may save that for something else. That's a pretty unusual figure, though I had in this lot of lumber a number of pieces of quilted cherry that I used on a chest on chest and on a desk, and I'll put some pictures up of those two pieces of furniture, and you can see the quilted figure in the drawers on those two pieces. So this is another piece of the same lot of lumber, happens to have the quilting in it. Alright, next step is to cut these into roughly 25-inch lengths so that we can get pieces long enough to glue up the panels. Oh, looks like the boys are coming in. There's my Butchie. How we doing, huh? And there's my Brutus. How you guys doing? Being good boys? Yeah. It was raining earlier today, but it's nice now. All right, good puppies. Anybody want a treat? Let's see what we got here. All right, now sit. Sit. Good boys. I've got all the material cut up into rough lengths, and I'm starting to lay out my 5 panels. So let me draw a picture. I'm no artist, but this is what I'm going to try to do. So So basically just building this four-sided box, and then I'm going to make another board to go on top of it. That's not a very good depiction of it, but there'll be another board on top of it that'll overhang the front and the two sides. So I need this inside top panel and then the outside top panel, right and left panels, and bottom panel. Now the inside top panel can, not very important, won't ever be seen. One printer will sit in here, another printer will sit on top. This panel will be visible, the bottom panel largely not, this panel somewhat visible, the top will be visible. So my dimensions are going to be inside dimensions. Target is 22 inches tall, 20 inches wide, and 18 to 20 inches, we'll just say 20 inches deep. All right, so these panels need to be 20 by 22. The top and the top and bottom panels 20 by 20, and then this overhanging top panel will be, let's make it 3 inches wider, and which you get 1.5 inches, probably reduce that, 2 inches wider. So instead of 20, this is these are inside dimensions. So outside dimensions, this is really 23 and a half. 3/4 and 3/4. And 20 inches wide, so 23 and a half. And this has to be 21 and a half by 20. 23 and a half by 20 times 2 times 2, and then this is 20 this way, so we'll make it 21 and a half, so it'll be 21 and a half front to back, and this is 21 and a half this way, so we're going to add 2 inches, so that'll give us 23 and a half. So here's my sides, 23 and 1/2 by 20 long. So the grain's going to run vertical, times 2. Top and bottom, 21 and a half by 20 inches wide, 20 inches this way. The grain's going to run vertical, so 23 and a half long, 21 and a half long, 20 inches wide times 2, and then the top is 23 and a half long by 21.5 wide times 1. I've laid out my rough cut pieces of lumber into the 5 panels, and that is the 4 panels for the basic box, and then the 5th panel is going to be a decorative top on it. So I've tried to sort through the material. They're all between 19 and 20 inches wide, and tried to make several very, the nicest boards in 2 or 3 panels, and put all the worst boards in the one panel, which will either be the inside top or the bottom. Not sure at this point. Anyway, I'm getting ready to glue up this panel, and I'll go ahead and show you my process for that. It's really simple. PVA wood glue. You want to just see a slight squeeze out through most of the joint. Tells you you've got enough glue. We'll let this one sit. I'll do this on the other 4 panels, and I'll bring you back when it comes time to surface and final size the panels. All right, I've got 2 of the panels, just took them out of the clamps, put 2 more panels in the clamps. So I got this one and this one. We'll come back, glue up the last panel, and then start sizing these, bringing them down to dimensions so that we can dovetail them and complete the printer stand. A little bit of glue squeeze out. I want to get rid of that. Before we send it through back through the planer. All right, the panels are, 4 of them are 19.5 inches wide. This one panel, which is probably the nicest one, is 20.5 inches wide. So this won't go through the planer at this width. So my finish width for all the panels is going to be 18 inches. Decided on that. So this one will finish off at 19.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and rip it to 19 3/4 before I run it through the planer. But I'm going to run all these pieces through the planer as they are with the various length boards. The idea is to get a flat surface, right? So it doesn't matter if some of these boards are sticking out. And in fact, with most planers, there's a little bit of inaccuracy in the last inch or two of cut, called snipe, where the knives may take more, the wood may lift up a little bit, and so the knives sometimes take a little more lumber off, so the thickness may vary over the length. So having extra length on the boards is a good thing. And if there is any snipe at the end of the boards, it'll wind up being cut off as we trim all these to their finished length. So I've got the lumber down to 3/4 of an inch exactly. And all the boards are smooth and flush on both sides. All right, you saw me trim all these panels to size on my table saw sled, and of course I was measuring to make sure I could get the required length and at what portion of the waist I wanted to cut off. So I was measuring each piece. I was cutting them to 21.5 or 23.5. And you know, I have a gauge here which I can set, which creates a stop point. So that means that each board that's slid up against here is the same length. So if you're making a drawer or a case or a box, you know, the sides have to be the same length, identical. So you want to set up a stop, and you want to cut all the pieces for that length using that stop without making any other adjustments. The same with ripping the panels to width. I ripped them to 18 inches. I ripped them all. I set the fence and ripped all panels. So make all cuts that are to the same dimension without changing your setup, and that way you're sure that they're all going to be the same size. If you start jumping around dimensions, then you're never going to get back to the exact same dimension, and if you're off a 1/16 of an inch or a 32nd of an inch, it matters. So I cut one end off with the sled, cut one end off, and then slid it over against the stop to cut it to length. And I had two different lengths set. I had 21.5 and then 23.5. So the 21.5 are the top and bottom, 23.5 are the two sides, and then this is the top, the decorative top. So it's actually an inch wider. It's 19 inches wide, and it's 23.5 inches. So it's an inch wider on each side. So it's 2 inches longer. So that's the plan. We've got all the panels cut to size, and the next step is to lay them out again, mark them for the assembly order, the box, which edge is the front edge, which side's the top, orient them so that the best grain patterns are visible, and get ready to start cutting dovetails. Like I said, if you buy FAS, first and seconds, you buy good lumber from a mill workshop, you won't have the amount of waste I have. Actually, this is not that much waste, really. It looked like it was going to be a lot of waste, but it's really not that much, and some of it's not, really not usable wood. This got a check in it where a limb came out of the tree. Here you got a knot. So you got a knot here, you got a knot up here. This is a nice piece of wood here, but it's not. It's actually nicely figured. I may save that piece for something else. So how much waste you have depends on the quality of the wood you start with. And as I mentioned, this is run-of-the-mill lumber. That is literally whatever log came through the mill got cut up, and this is what you got. But it's surprising with even run-of-the-mill lumber how much of it is good lumber. And when you're building furniture, you seldom need a piece more than 3 or 4 feet long. So occasionally you need something longer, but you can cut around the defects, and there isn't really that much waste. I haven't found it to be a major problem. And I'll just let you know, I paid, and it's been 20 years ago, I paid 80 cents a board foot for 2,000 board feet of cherry and walnut lumber. So I'm still using that lumber. I still have probably a third to a half of it left, and I've built all the pieces, all the furniture that I've shown pictures of in the video are pieces that I've built from that from that lumber. All right, it's after 10 tonight. It's 10:30. I'm going to quit and come back tomorrow, lay out the panels, decide what we want them to look like, or how we want the box to be assembled, and mark it up, get ready to do some dovetailing. All right, guys, that's about all we can get done in this first half of the printer stand build project. This completes part 1. We'll come back next episode, part 2. Now that we've got all the panels sized and surfaced, we'll run them through the dovetail jig, the Leigh 24-inch dovetail jig, which is a pretty interesting tool. And then we'll make the finished top on the shaper. We've got a valance to build as well for it. So we'll finish up the printer stand in the next episode. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys then.